Okay, so there's this film called Life is Beautiful, starring Roberto Benigni, and he plays this guy, Guido Orefice. And Guido's like this hilarious Italian Jewish bookstore owner, and he falls in love, and he has two children with the woman that he falls in love with. But tragedy strikes, and he and his family are taken into the concentration camps. In the concentration camp, he maintains his optimism throughout. And he even invents a game. And the object of the game is to never get caught. And if you win, you get a huge golden tank. I don't know if the director or writer of Life is Beautiful was familiar with Viktor Frankl's works, but a lot of Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning shows up in this film. So this is Blighted Pine Books, and today we're going to do a review of Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning. So who's Viktor Frankl? He's an Austrian psychologist and psychiatrist. He's obviously a Holocaust survivor, and he created a new form of therapy called logotherapy that he describes in some detail in the book. The book is divided into two sections, and in the first section, Viktor Frankl describes his experiences in the concentration camps. If you've read Elie Wiesel's Night or seen films like Schindler's List or Life is Beautiful, look, I'm sure you will already know about the Holocaust. Nothing Viktor Frankl says really contradicts or expands upon what most are already familiar with: the depravity, the animal-like treatment, the severe malnourishment, the extreme labor. All of this is detailed in Man's Search for Meaning. With that being said, Viktor Frankl isn't a writer. He's a psychologist. So in Elie Wiesel's Night, the primary goal of the book is to reveal the atrocities in lurid detail. In Viktor Frankl's book, though, it's more about the psychological reaction that people had to their experiences in the concentration camp. And later in the first part, Viktor Frankl has a realization. He realizes that those that are alive have something to be alive for. They are living for a family member or for a work of science that needs to be completed. They're holding on to something like a rope of meaning. And this leads into part two of the book, where Viktor Frankl describes logotherapy. Logos is the word for meaning. And so this form of therapy is focused on how we create meaning in our lives. And Viktor Frankl is very clear about the three ways which he believes that most human beings create meaning. The first one, simply work. Doing stuff that we love, stuff we find difficult, and prevailing. This is one way we create meaning. Two, culture, arts, and nature. I love music. I go backpacking regularly. Obviously, I read a little bit. And I never really thought about how this was like a way that a person creates meaning. I just thought, like, this is what people do because they like it. And then finally, the third is people. Maybe the most important, the most significant for most is our relationships. So Frankl very clearly outlines the ways in which we create meaning. And in some ways, it's very unsurprising. It's almost frustrating that I hadn't really thought about this directly myself. I think for many, it will just ring as true. But for me, it really served as an opportunity to think about the way these three pillars of meaning are fulfilled in my own life, and to what degree. Logotherapy is also kind of future-oriented. This goes against some of the more modern mindful trends, which explain how the future is something that we shouldn't be concerned with because the present moment is the only thing that really exists. But Frankl acknowledges that maybe we need something like a blueprint of the future to look forward to, because if we have nothing to look forward to whatsoever because we don't think there's anything worthy of imagining, then it's going to be difficult for us to find a reason to keep trudging along the path of life. He does note, though, that many who did survive and were holding on to those like ropes of meaning after they were liberated and they returned home, they found that the people that they were looking forward to were gone. And Frankl describes this as personally one of the most difficult things that he went through as a Holocaust survivor, and many others as well. In the last section of the book, he just talks about some patients. And one very memorable one was a woman who had two sons, one who had died and one who was paralyzed from the waist down. And this woman felt so frustrated with her own life and became so depressed that she attempted suicide. Her partially paralyzed son prevented her from doing so and explained how he couldn't imagine why anyone would want to commit suicide because life was so wonderful. She ends up in a mental institution where she is in a group setting, and Viktor Frankl enters this group therapy session, and he asks another woman to imagine a life without children, and she paints this picture of a life where she's very wealthy and she has a lot of social connections, but she's 80 years old and she looks back on her life and she feels as though perhaps it was a failure. And so this woman, the mother of the paralyzed son, realizes that taking care of her son, she's giving him a much better life than if he were simply sent off to a care home. And so she develops in her own mind and in her own heart a deep sense of meaning formed from her relationship with her son. It's worth noting that Frankl does comment that just having children isn't the only way we can create meaning. He writes, I observed that procreation is not the only meaning of life, for then life in itself would become meaningless, and something which in itself is meaningless cannot be rendered meaningful merely by its perpetuation. So I listened to most of this book on Audible, and occasionally while I was listening to the book, I also listened to some podcasts. And one of the podcasts was the Huberman Lab, Andrew Huberman's podcast. And he had on the venerable and wily David Goggins. And they were talking about some studies that Huberman was doing on how certain parts of the brain like light up when a person is doing something really difficult. And they found that when a person does do this difficult work and do something that they overcome, that this part of the brain actually grows. And so the suggestion was that maybe there's a part of the brain that is actually like the control center of our will to live, or like our meaning-making center. So in conclusion, this book kind of introduces logotherapy. It illustrates Viktor Frankl's like core beliefs about how we can live a fulfilled life through these like three pillars of meaning. And so I think it's kind of an unreviewable book. It's an important book. It really makes clear just through these three pillars of work and arts, culture, and nature, and people, how if we are feeling that void, and I think more so than ever in the modern world with our constant interconnection, but also lack of connection, and we're doing less reading and spending time in nature and more times in front of screens, I think this question of how we create meaning in our lives is going to become like more and more important. And so this book, I think, is more of like a doorway into allowing us to explore that like most important part of our lives. So is it a great book? I'd say it's essential reading. It's not the most wonderfully written book in the world. Viktor Frankl's not a writer. He is a psychologist. But I do think that if you read it, the pillars of meaning that Viktor Frankl writes about in the book will remain with you for the rest of your life. All right, so that's it for Blighted Pine Books. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll catch you next time.